Alright, listen up. If you are a social justice warrior, if you are a very sensitive person who loves to cancel people, I'm not going to be your cup of tea, and this video is definitely going to trigger you. So, get out. Now we can talk.
For me, tennis and men's tennis and women's tennis are completely almost two separate sports. So I'm like, if I were to play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in 5 to 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, because no, it's true. It's true. It's a completely different sport. The men are a lot faster, and they serve harder, they hit harder. It's just a different game.
On up front though, because Michael Cherry is closing in and just speeding past Justina Svetiovsetic, who can't panic here, and she knew this was going to happen here. Turn is closing on Francis, and Francis now passes Justina Svetiovsetic, but Martin Rooney trying to get there. United States way out in front. They take a new world record, sub 3:10. Jamaica hold on back.
But you can still see the nuts swinging unevenly and landing in that woman's mouth like a teabag. Before the fight, he passed a number of medical tests, including one that proved that he had suitable levels of hormones. If you're wondering whether that's enough to offset the advantages of being a man for over 30 years, remember how little damage Provost has done so far.
So as you can see by the title, today I want to talk about the trans community in female sports, specifically biological female sports, and if trans women belong in biological female sports. I'll make it super fast and easy for you guys right off the top. No, trans women do not belong in biological women's sports. In this video, I'm going to break down why exactly I feel this way, point by point. Now, I want to preface by saying I have nothing against the trans community. If you are a trans person, whether that be male or female, do you. That's your life. You are an adult. Do you live your best life? However, I still believe that there are certain structures and fairness that we have to talk about when it comes to sports specifically. Because biology, regardless of what the left tells you, biology does matter. And I'm sorry, I can't pretend like biology all of a sudden no longer is a factor just to appease anyone's feelings. I'm not going to do that. Let's get into this. So my major point in why I believe that trans females should not be in biological female sports is the obvious, which is the biological differences between men and women. Your identity does not change your biology. I know, that's a hard pill to swallow. Take it in. You'll be all right. You still have biological factors that play a role in how your body functions, how you walk through life, especially in sports. So we're not talking about just a regular Joe Schmo off the street who decides to transition from male to female and then decides to become an athlete. We're talking about professional athletes who have been competing in their craft and training in their craft for years, sometimes an entire lifetime. Swimmers, track and field athletes, cyclists, boxers, weightlifters, whatever it be. Normally, that person has been training in their sport, their respective sport, for at least 10, 15 years before they decide to transition from male to female. So even if you are on hormones and you're not changing your muscle mass, you're still an athlete at the end of the day, right? You're still training 6, 7, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. You're still eating your meals. You're still getting your protein intake. You're still running. You're still doing your cardio. You're still doing everything that you did when you were the opposite sex. That's not going to just leave you because you're now on hormones. It's not. It's going to have a difference, but it's not going to have a drastic difference if you're still training the same way that you were training when you were a male. And that is a factor. The other factor is, although you may be on hormones, your hormones are not going to change your body structure. It's just not. Like, your arms are not going to magically shrink in. You're still going to have the lung capacity that you were born with as a male. You're still going to have the bone structure that you have as a male, the shoulders, the arms, the hand spans, the feet width, like all of those things that play a role in athletics, depending on the sport that you're playing in, is not going to go away. If you were 6 foot when you were a male, you're going to be 6 foot as a female. And Caitlyn Jenner, who I know is very controversial for a lot of people because she is a former trans athlete who is still conservative, made some really great points regarding this very issue.
I have said from the beginning, and I stand with it, that I don't want biological boys to compete against women and girls in sports. It's just not fair. She had gone through male puberty. Her lungs are bigger, her back's bigger, her hands are bigger. She just has a tremendous advantage in swimming in the pool against the women. And and she proved that.
Another major factor is Marion Jones. Now, Marion Jones, for those who don't know, was a former track and field star. She was an Olympian. She was a gold medalist. She was pretty much one of the fastest women in the world throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. She was one of the strongest track stars that we've ever seen. The problem, though, is that Marion Jones was doping the majority of her athletic career, unfortunately. And she had all of her medals taken away from her. She went to jail. It was a big story. But the point that I want to make is that when Marion Jones was at her height, which was the late 90s, she ran her fastest time in the 100 meters, and that was 10.65 seconds. Now that ranks her as number 5 in the world today within the last 100 years of female runners. She's number 5 with that time. I wanted to compare her time with the time of the fastest men in the world within the last 100 years, and I wanted to see where she would compare and where she would rank. So I compared her time, 10.65, with the men's world rankings within the last 100 years, and to my surprise or non-surprise, Marion Jones doesn't even rank. And you go all the way down, the very last man is ranked 8,921, and that is a man from Australia named Danny Arbin. And his time was 10.55 seconds. That means Marion Jones, if she were on this list, would be ranking in the 8,000s within the last 100 years of men. Now you may say, now listen, some of the men in track and field were probably doping themselves, so that gave them an advantage, and that's probably is a fair point. But if everybody's doping, then you are playing at the same level playing field, sadly enough, you are. What trans activists will say is, there's no real difference biologically between men and women, and that shouldn't be a factor. It shouldn't be a factor. Well, this is a clear example of why biology is a factor. No matter how you try to slice it and dice it, biology is always going to be a factor when it comes to the differences between men and women.
Last year was my senior year, and about November of 2021, which is about the middle of our season, ranking first was a person I had never heard of before. And of course, this name was Leah Thomas. But at the time, just looking at this on paper, it didn't really make much sense to me because this person was a senior and I'd never heard of them and came out of nowhere and was leading the nation by multiple seconds in multiple events ranging from the 100 free, which is a sprint, all the way to a mile, which is a distance event. And so typically, think of running, your fastest 200-meter runner is not going to be your fastest 5K runner.
Yeah.
And so there were so many red flags, but it never once occurred to me that this could be a man just because that was so far out of reach.
Yeah.
We all sat on the sidelines as Leah Thomas became the fastest female in the country, winning a national title in the 500 freestyle, beating out, Olympians, American record holders, the fastest females of all time. And that next day was when Leah and I raced each other. So when we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
But the NCAA official looks at me and says, "Great job, y'all tied. The trophy goes to Leah.
What?
We'll eventually mail you yours." And so I kind of look at him and he said, "Well, for photo purposes, Leah has to have it."
Wow. Yeah.
Oftentimes, you also will hear trans activists use intersex people as an argument. So they'll say, intersex people compete as well. Should they be ousted? Should they be treated differently like trans people? It's not their fault.
This issue, people like to say that it's a complicated issue, and I don't actually think it is. I think it's very simple. It all boils down to, do you actually think that trans women and intersex women are real women and are really female or not?
And that's a weak argument, and I'm going to explain why. Number one, intersex people are not majority in the world. They're just not. Being intersex is a birth defect. It is something that majority of the population does not have. So to pretend like intersex people are a vast majority in this argument is just false. And it's intellectually dishonest to even bring intersex people into the equation because intersex people did not choose to be intersex. Trans people chose to transition medically. Intersex people have only competed in 9 Olympics in the last 100 years. And there have been over 53 Olympic Games. So clearly intersex people are not a huge factor in this argument. But trans people, we know that trans people are transitioning at a much faster and higher rate. And I think it's only a matter of time before you start seeing a vast number of trans women entering female sports at a much higher rate than we're even seeing right now, which is why it's so important to talk about this, because if we don't talk about it, it's going to grow and grow and grow. And before you know it, you're going to be watching the Olympic Games and you're going to be seeing majority, if not half of the field being biological men, erasing women in their sport, which is just, to me, is just wrong. It's wrong. Women have been fighting so hard to have a place in sports. Funding for women is a lot lower than it is for men. Viewership is a lot lower than it is for men. And to now have biological women have to compete with biological men just to have a place, it's just not fair. It's not right. And the other point that I want to make is if biology doesn't matter according to the left and according to trans activists, then why aren't we having the same conversation regarding trans men? Biological women who identify as men and who live as men who are also athletes. Why is this conversation pretty much non-existent on the biological male side of sports? I'll tell you why. Because biological men have biological advantages compared to women, even women who identify as men. That's why. That's why this conversation is one-sided and only about biological female sports, because we know and they know that there are biological differences that we cannot just ignore. That's why trans men are not really a factor in this conversation, because far and large, they do not dominate male sports and they are not a real threat to male athletes on the elite level the same way that trans women are to female athletes on the elite level. And Leah Thomas is just the tip of the iceberg. So in conclusion, I want to make it very clear I am not against trans people. I do not hate trans people. I am not transphobic. Phobia is having an irrational fear of something or someone. I do not have an irrational fear. I think this argument is a very rational one because we're talking about science and biology. And although the left likes to pretend like science and biology don't matter, it does matter. And it's very rational to discuss the biological differences between men and women. It's actually irrational not to discuss this and to pretend as though it's not a factor when we know that it is. Just ask the biological women who have to compete against biological men if it's a factor or not. It's a factor. So I don't know where this debate is going to go. I don't know how far this is going to go. I don't know if there's going to be any solution anytime soon, but what I do know is that we have to keep talking about this. We have to ignore cancel culture and woke culture, and we have to keep talking about this to defend biological women, because biological women are being erased in their own spaces, and it's not okay. If you're a trans woman, you should understand the importance of biological women having a voice and not being silenced by being called transphobic or hateful. Because hate is the last thing that is happening here. We're talking about logic. We're talking about common sense. We're talking about biology. We're talking about science. So that is my take on trans women and biological women sports. I know I probably pissed off some people, and that's okay. Because when you speak truth, oftentimes people get pissed off. But if you weren't pissed off and you support my ideas and you like my videos, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and hit that like button and hit the notification bell so that you can follow me throughout my journey here on YouTube. I have changed up my content. I used to do solely hair content. Now I'm doing more political, social commentary because that's just my passion. So if you guys like it, hit that subscribe button and let's continue on this journey together. Please also follow me on TikTok. I just hit 63,000, and also follow me on Instagram. I lost a lot of Instagram followers from the curly hair community because they're all woke and I got canceled, but it's okay. I'm still going to continue to fight the good fight and speak truth and common sense, even in this extremely left-leaning woke culture world. Common sense still matters, and I'm going to speak truth. Till next time, guys, peace out.